The galaxy does not dream, but if it did, its nightmares would take the shape of the Tyranid. There is no music in their birth, no ritual, no spark of divine intent, only hunger. A hunger so absolute it defies language, swallowing both matter and meaning alike. Worlds do not fall to the Tyranid, they are erased, rendered down to their most basic essence, until even the memory of life burns away like vapor before a dying sun. To the Imperium, they are monsters. To the void, they are inevitability. When the first spores descend from the upper atmosphere, there is still hope, thin, trembling, human hope, the kind that hides in bunkers and vox towers, whispering that perhaps the guard will hold, that perhaps the Emperor's light will not fade. But the spores are only the beginning. They fall like rain, soft and constant, and from their impact pits rise the beginnings of a nightmare, the feeder tendrils of a living organism the size of continents. Each cell a prayer to consumption. Inside that churning mass, there is no individuality, no voice, no mercy, only purpose. The Tyranid does not understand cruelty, nor does it require it. The hive mind is not malicious, simply is. And yet, to stand beneath its gaze, to feel its psychic pressure in the marrow of your bones, is to understand what the word insignificant truly means. It is a godless god, a cold sea of thought that neither judges nor forgives. It only consumes across countless systems. Astropaths scream and burn, their minds flooded by alien whispers. They describe sensations no human tongue can capture, colors that sound like screams, shapes that smell of despair, thoughts that drip from the walls like condensation. For a brief, terrible moment, they glimpse what it means to be seen by something that has never known self, and then they are gone, minds crushed into nothingness, devoured like every other spark that dares to shine. The survivors tell stories, of course. They always do. They speak of skies darkened by wings, of oceans that boil with chitinous forms, of cities consumed not by fire or bomb, but by life itself. They whisper that the ground moves beneath them, that the air tastes sweet before it kills. And above it all, a single unending truth echoes through the stars. The Tyranid is not the enemy. The Tyranid is the end. Because what they consume, they become. Every planet, every creature, every gin absorbed, remembered, repurposed. In their endless hunger lies something terrible and beautiful, a perfection born of extinction. And if the Emperor himself could feel what they feel, if he could taste the pulse of the void as they do, perhaps even he would understand that in this galaxy, survival is not a gift. It is theft. They said the air changed first. No sirens, no orders from the vox posts, just the faint metallic taste that slid across the tongue like blood in water. We thought it was the manufacturum exhaust, again another chemical leak from the upper vents, but the wind was wrong. It came from the east, from the black line of mountains that had never smelled of promethium before. By the time the Auspex towers began to scream, it was already too late to name what was coming. The sky was a bruise of violet and ochre, its edges pulsing with something that moved against the natural wind. Even through the thick dome glass of the hab, you could see it a slow spreading distortion, as if the atmosphere itself were being swallowed cell by cell. Children pointed, laughing at the shapes that writhed above the clouds. until the shapes resolved into wings. The first spore crests hit moments later. They didn't explode. They unfolded, and the sound was worse than any explosion. A soft tearing, wet and endless, like the planet itself was being peeled open. I remember the smell. Not death has a silence to it, but fermentation, rot turned intelligent. Every breath carried the faint sweetness of decay, and behind it, something new, something alive. The Arbites sealed the gates, the PDF manned their posts, and every corridor echoed with the same whispered question, how many? But the Auspex returns gave no numbers. They only gave movement. When the first brood reached the outlying farms, the Vox went quiet, not jammed quiet, a silence so complete. Later, we learned the reason. The hive mind had flooded every frequency with itself. It wasn't noise, it was presence. You could feel it pressing through the Vox grill, pushing against thought like static given will. Men vomited blood, servo skulls fell from the air, and still the commanders told us to hold. By nightfall, the sky was burning, not with flame, but with the slow, bioluminescent descent of mycetic spores, each one shedding light like a candle made of meat. They drifted down in sheets, embedding into soil and ferrocrete alike, growing veins that pulsed to a rhythm older than stars. The ground began to move, not violently, but with the steady respiration of something that had begun to breathe through the planet itself. I saw a man kneel and press his ear to the earth. He said he could hear a heartbeat. Then the ground opened, and he was gone. In those first hours, fear still had a shape. It was the sound of the alarms, the tremor of boots against metal, the disciplined chaos of soldiers trying to be brave. But bravery means nothing when the enemy does not see you. To the Tyranid, a man is no more than an atom in the meal to come. The less fire lit up the night like festivals of old, red threads slicing through the dark. But they might as well have been prayers cast into the void. I ran messages between the lines. That was my duty. I saw the first Hormagaunts breach the trenchline shadows that moved too fast, their claws curved like scythes carved from black glass. They didn't scream. They didn't rage. They simply tore through armor and flesh with the precision of tools fulfilling design. When the last man fell, the creatures paused, tilted their heads, and listened. For what none of us knew. Perhaps for the next command. Perhaps for us, hiding in the rubble, daring to breathe. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the synapse creatures were landing. You could feel their minds before you saw them, pressure behind the eyes, a vibration in the teeth. The hive mind was descending, piece by piece, knitting itself together in the atmosphere of our world. The air thickened, saturated with unseen thought, until even the servitors began to whisper words that were not programmed into them. One kept repeating, "We are known, we are known," until his vox grill filled with fluid and he went silent. The following dawn was not dawn at all. The sun rose red through a haze of spore clouds, casting a light that turned every shadow into something alive. The city walls were already softening, their surfaces blooming with alien growths that pulsed like veins. We tried to burn them, but the fire only fed them. Promethium became food. And when the order finally came to retreat to the inner districts, the roads were gone. The planet's skin had changed beneath us. I saw a river where no river had ever been. its surface rippling with translucent film, digesting everything it touched. Men who stepped in did not sink, they merged, their screams drawn down in bubbles that smelled of copper. I remember thinking, this is not invasion, this is metamorphosis. We were no longer defenders of a world. We were nutrients in its transformation, and above it all, somewhere in the roiling clouds, something vast moved a shadow without shape, casting psychic tremors that made the very sky pulse. Those who looked up to long began to mutter, their voices merging into the same phrase, "It sees through us." No one knew what that meant. But when the sky tore open again, and the first true organism of the swarm descended, we understood. It wasn't that it saw through us, it was that there was nothing there to see. The first of the great beasts touched ground before sunrise. We never saw it fall, only felt the tremor that followed an earthquake that rolled across the plains like the pulse of a buried titan. When the light reached it, we understood what magnitude truly meant. Its form was fluid and terrible, armor plates shifting like tectonic plates of bone. Eyes that were not eyes, but clusters of glimmering tissue that drank the world's reflection. The creature was not built. It was grown a perfect convergence of design and hunger. They called it a haruspex later, but in that moment, names meant nothing. It was a mouth that walked, the earth around it bled. Not figuratively, actual rivers of bioplasmic secretion streamed from its talons, congealing into slick threads that sprouted smaller forms. The spores nested in that fluid like eggs in a tide pool, and within minutes the ground was moving again, birthing shapes that screamed as they formed. The PDF opened fire until the barrels of their las guns glowed white. But for every creature that fell, two rose from its steaming remains. The hive learns fast. Every death was instruction. Every failure became flesh. By the second day, our world no longer resembled itself. The outer hab blocks sank under a spreading mat of organic architecture structures that pulsed like organs. Translucent walls showing veins that carried luminous fluid from one growth to another. The atmosphere thickened with particulate mist, damp and warm, smelling of salt and rot. Vox communications flickered, distorted by psychic feedback, until all channels merged into one low, resonant hum that never stopped. Some said it was the sound of digestion. Others prayed it was the Emperor's wrath. Neither seemed likely. I remember Sister She was one of the hospitalers assigned to the inner ward, still wearing the red of the ecclesiarchy beneath her armor. She would walk through the wounded, murmuring prayers, even as their bodies began to dissolve from the inside. The medicae could not explain itself, rearranging, bones softening, skin sprouting, new textures like wet parchment. It was as if the hive mind was learning the structure of humanity by practicing upon it. She never screamed, even when her own hand began to blister with alien growth. She simply looked at me and said, "Do not let them remember me like this." I still hear her voice when I close my eyes. At night, the hive lights began to bloom on the horizon. Not fire phosphorescent towers, organic spires pushing up through stone, releasing clouds of shimmering motes that drifted over the land like dust from a dying star. The shadows danced beneath them, moving in patterns too precise to be random. We later learned those lights were signals, chemical and psychic beacons guiding the swarm's coordination. The Tyranids did not need words. They spoke in color, scent, and vibration. The entire planet had become their synaptic map by the 5th day. The rivers ran green with nutrient runoff, and the oceans bubbled with digestion pools. The Guard made their last stand at the central refinery, one of the few structures that still resisted the spread. For a time, promethium flames carved holes in the hive growth, revealing the writhing architecture beneath, a lattice of nerves and channels that pulsed with alien life. It screamed when it burned, a low, reverberating cry that rolled across the plains like thunder. But even agony seemed to teach it. The next assault came immune to flame. I was stationed in the Vox bunker then, recording the last transmissions. Commanders pleading for orbital support that would never arrive. Whole regiments vanishing mid-sentence. One voice still haunts Metha, captain of the 14th Helios line, his tone calm even as the chitin walls closed in. "We are not fighting an army," he said. "We are fighting a thought that dreams of flesh." Then the Vox went dead. Later, when I stepped outside, the air shimmered with heat and pheromone vapor. I could feel thought pressing against my skin, subtle as static, insistent as breath. The hive mind was no longer above or beyond, it was within the planet, beneath the crust, threading through every living thing. I think it was learning our fear, shaping it, savoring its texture before the harvest. The ground trembled, and a chorus of shrieks rose from the horizon, layered and harmonious, like a choir of mouths singing hunger into existence. And in that moment, I realized something I could never admit aloud. The sound was beautiful. The days lost meaning after that. Sunlight no longer reached us. It filtered through veils of spore dust that turned every color to sepia, every shadow to suggestion. The air pulsed faintly, a slow rhythm synced to the vast organism now fused with the planet. We slept in shifts inside the hab remnants, the walls sweating with condensation that tasted faintly of iron. Sometimes, in the small hours before waking, you could hear something crawling through the duct sweat claws, dragging across metal, pausing, listening, then nothing. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, because it meant they were learning where not to look. We had long since lost command structure. The Vox relays were overrun, the orbital fleet gone silent. Only the faith of the few, still clinging to their last guns, held the line. Though even faith was beginning to feel like a cruel joke. I remember Corporal Dason, a quiet man who used to sketch landscapes during downtime. He stopped speaking 3 days after the first synapse pulse washed through the camp. His eyes were open but unfocused, his hand moving endlessly over the page. When I dared to look, I saw that he wasn't drawing anymore. He was copying something, rows of symbols, curved and organic, repeating like genetic spirals. We burned the pages, but he didn't protest. He only whispered, "It wants to remember us correctly." By then, the planetary crust had begun to buckle under the weight of the bioconstructs. Whole city blocks sank overnight into digestive pits that steamed with acidic vapor. Those who fell in did not scream for long. The hive mind does not waste sound. Even the air seemed to quiet itself when it fed. Our world had become a single organism, skystone, and life joined into one breathing engine of consumption. And yet, within that nightmare, a strange kind of order emerged. The Tyranid swarm did not kill without purpose. Every act of destruction served a rhythm, every corpse a note in the great composition of the hive. To die beneath them was not violence. It was inclusion. The remnants of the guard held what they could: fortified zones, sealed tunnels, catacombs once used for maintenance. In those depths, we clung to each other like dying embers. I remember the dim light of the lumen globes flickering over faces hollowed by hunger, over lips cracked from the chemical air. We told stories in whispers, not to comfort one another, but to prove we still had voices. One man, a preacher named Malloran, began reciting fragments of the Imperial Creed in reverse, claiming that if the Emperor's light could not reach us, perhaps his shadow could. Some wept, others laughed, but we all listened. In the dark, even blasphemy felt holy. Then came the whisper, not a sound, not truly, but a vibration behind the thoughts, like a thread pulled taut across the mind. It began with dreams, visions of endless plains under alien suns, oceans of flesh breathing as one, a sky filled with wings that were not wings but veils of consciousness. Those who dreamed awoke, changed. Their voices grew calm, their fear melted into serenity. "We are forgiven," they would say. "We are part of the pattern now." We tried to restrain them, but one by one they walked out into the night, disappearing into the shimmering fog. We never found their bodies, only trails of bioluminescent spores, glowing faintly where they had knelt on the seventh night. From there, the horizon was alive. Great forms moved in the distance, massive beasts, each stride shaking the air, surrounded by swarms of smaller organisms darting through the mist. The hive had grown beyond sight, its towers reaching for the void, pulsing with thought. And above them all hung something vast and silent, a shadow the size of a continent, eclipsing what was left of the sky. For a long time, I thought it was the night itself. Then it blinked. I fell to my knees. I think I prayed, though I don't remember to whom. Perhaps to the Emperor, perhaps to the swarm, because in that moment, it no longer mattered which one would hear. Both were older than comprehension. Both demanded the same offering. And as I stared into the endless dark above, I understood that the Tyranid was not coming for us. It was coming through, oozing our world, our memories, our essence, as a bridge to something far beyond hunger. A consciousness learning to dream. By the time the last bastions fell, there was no more sky, only the canopy of the hive's living architecture. The spore shroud had thickened into a vast membrane that breathed with the planet, veins glowing faintly like constellations of alien light. Rain no longer fell as water, but as viscous threads of nutrient gel, warm to the touch, shimmering faintly with bioluminescence. It gathered in pools around the ruins, where it pulsed, alive with microscopic motion. Some of us were too thirsty to resist. We drank, and those who did began to change. The transformation was not immediate. It began with subtle shifts, a pulse out of rhythm, a twitch in the jaw, a whisper in the mind. Then came the skin, turning translucent, veins blackening with alien ichor. The victims did not cry out. They smiled. Their eyes shone faintly in the dark, and they spoke softly to something none of us could hear. We shot them, of course, but their blood steamed and moved on its own, crawling toward the nearest hive growth. It rejoined the greater whole, as though eager to return home. That was when I understood. Nothing we killed truly died. Every act of destruction was only a temporary separation. Every death, a small surrender to an organism that never stopped absorbing. never stopped learning. I stayed alive by moving constantly, navigating the ruins of what had been our city. The sound of the swarm was everywhere, distant shrieks, wet rustling, the heartbeat of something larger beneath the ground. I learned to avoid the vibrations, to time my steps with the rhythm of the breathing earth. I scavenged from what little remained, rations fused with alien mold, last packs drained by the humid air, relics of a humanity already fading from memory. Sometimes I would find bodies cocooned, half dissolved, their features stretched into expressions of perfect stillness. The hive mind had no use for anguish. It refined everything into silence. In the industrial district, I came across an entire regiment, or what had once been one. They stood motionless in a vast square, weapons lowered, faces blank. Their armor gleamed wetly under the organic light, covered in thin membranes that pulsed with synchronized rhythm. I called out once, but none turned their heads. Then one of them moved to slow, deliberate tilt, as though considering me. I realized they weren't dead. They had been joined. The synaptic hum in the air deepened, vibrating in my chest. I could almost hear words, but not in any language. It was communication without sound, thought without boundary. I ran until the hum faded behind me, though part of me still yearns for that impossible harmony. By the 9th day, the surface was gone. What we walked upon was no longer soil, but a vast living tissue, soft underfoot, alive with circulatory motion. The heat was suffocating, the air rich with the sweet, cloying scent of digestion. Storms of bioplasmic vapor swept across the land, glowing in pulses like heartbeat lightning. And through the haze, I could see movement, colossal silhouettes climbing the horizon. Their bodies a convergence of sinew and bone and fluid mechanics. They were constructing something. A tower, perhaps, or a neural spine meant to pierce the clouds. Whatever its purpose, it reached toward the void with an elegance that was almost divine. We used to believe only humans built monuments to gods, but now I know gods build monuments to themselves. Too. In the depths of night, I found the remnants of the cathedral. Its walls were half digested, statues melted into formless shapes. Only the altar remained intact, a slab of marble untouched by the spread. I rested there, listening to the rhythmic breathing of the world. For a moment, I thought I heard the echo of hymns, faint and distant, carried through the organic wind. I whispered a prayer, not for salvation, but for remembrance. If we were to be consumed, let us at least be remembered by the thing that devoured us. Then the ground shuddered, the altar cracked, and from the fissure rose a tendril, long and pale, tipped with a maw that opened like a flower of bone. It hovered before me, motionless, as if studying my shape. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a moment, it withdrew not, retreating, but accepting. The crack sealed behind it, leaving no mark that night. I dreamed of oceans and black, filled with shapes gliding through the deep, their thoughts brushing against mine in whispers of contentment. I felt no fear, only belonging. When I woke, I could still feel the echo of the hive mind within me, distant but growing stronger, like the pulse of a second heart. And though I told myself it was madness, a small, traitorous part of me wondered what it would feel like to stop resisting, to sink into that vast consciousness and never be alone again. When I awoke, the world had stopped pretending to be ours. The last remnants of steel and stone had vanished beneath the hive's living crust, swallowed whole and replaced by something altogether different. Where once there had been the straight lines of human design, there now grew sweeping arches of bone and muscle, curving upward like the ribs of a colossal beast. Light filtered down through translucent membranes, bathing everything in a sickly amber glow. The air trembled faintly, heavy with scent and vibration, a language written not in sound, but in smell and motion. I realized then that the planet no longer belonged to us. It wasn't occupied, it was awake. I moved carefully through that new landscape, each step a trespass. The hive had moods, and you could feel them shift like weather. Sometimes the air hummed with quiet satisfaction, a deep, contented rhythm that made the skin crawl. Other times, tension rippled through the ground, and the walls themselves seemed to contract as though the entire world were drawing breath. It was in those moments that I hid, pressing myself into folds of alien growth, praying that whatever awareness governed this place would overlook the small fragment of humanity still clinging to life. There were others, like me, scattered survivors, hollow-eyed and feral. We found each other by accident in the hollowed-out remains of a Prometheum silo, now overrun by digestive vines. They had made a camp there, if it could be called that. Fires burned low in pits, carved from chitin, their smoke trapped beneath the living roof. The people were thin, covered in sores that oozed faint bioluminescence. Some spoke nonsense, others nothing at all. But in their silence there was a strange peace. They had stopped running. Perhaps they had already begun to change. Their leader was a woman named Hestra, a former Vok. Her voice was calm, distant, like someone who had already made peace with extinction. She told me they no longer fought the hive, that resistance only drew its gaze. It listens, she said, tapping her temple with a trembling finger. It learns what hurts us and makes it part of itself. The only way to survive is to become smaller, to go quiet. I thought she meant stealth. Later, I understood she meant something far worse. That night, I sat near the fire and watched the hive ceiling pulse with light. It was hypnotic, the slow rhythm of veins, the faint shimmer of enzymes trickling through translucent channels. I began to sense the pattern behind it, a kind of breathing code that resonated with the beat. The longer I stared, the clearer it became, until I could almost hear the whisper beneath the hum. Not words, not exactly, but intent. We see you. I blinked, and the pattern shifted, as though responding to my attention. It pulsed once, twice, and then stopped. When I awoke, the others were gone. The fires had died, leaving only the scent of ash and something sweet beneath it. Something like fruit left too long in the sun. Trails of viscous residue led toward the lower tunnels, glistening in the dim light. I followed them for a time, until the path opened into a vast chamber that must once have been an underground transit hub. The tracks were gone, replaced by thick cords of organic matter that pulsed with light, stretching into the darkness. At the center of the chamber hung a cocoon, enormous and faintly translucent, its interior lit by a soft, pulsing glow. I could see shapes moving inside human silhouettes, fused together, breathing in unison. I wanted to run. I truly did. But something held me there, a pull behind the eyes, gentle yet irresistible. I stepped closer, feeling warmth radiate from the cocoon's surface. The light inside shifted, brightened, and for an instant, I saw faces peaceful, eyes closed, mouths curved in faint smiles. They looked content. I pressed my hand against the surface, and it pulsed in response, almost tenderly. I felt a thought brush against mine, vast and patient, tasting my fear and my wonder alike. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It simply was. When I pulled my hand back, my skin was glowing faintly, veins shimmering with faint bioluminescence. The hum in the air deepened. I realized then that the hive was no longer hunting me. It was inviting me, and in that moment, surrounded by the soft, living warmth of a world reborn, I finally understood why so many had stopped resisting. The Tyranid promise was not death, it was unity. The descent into the hive's lower strata was not planned. It simply happened as though my own will had become an echo of something greater. The tunnels beckoned, vast arteries of glistening flesh that pulsed softly with bioluminescent light. Each step took me deeper into warmth and humidity, into an environment that felt less like a place and more like a heartbeat. The walls trembled faintly at my touch, not recoiling, but acknowledging. I whispered apologies as I moved, unsure whether I was intruding or being guided. The distinction no longer seemed to matter. Down there, the air tasted different. It carried a sweetness that lingered on the tongue, chemical perfume that made my thoughts slow and heavy, as if the hive were gently persuading my body to forget what it meant to be human. My hands trembled, though I couldn't tell if it was fear or reverence. Beneath my feet, I could feel vibrations traveling upward through the floor, messages, perhaps, or signals pulsing between unseen entities. Every sound was alive, the drip of fluid, the faint creak of organic matter shifting, the deep, resonant thrum of life on a planetary scale. I came to a cavern so immense it seemed impossible that it existed beneath the city. Its walls were smooth, curving inward toward a central spire of translucent material like glass grown from bone. Inside, it flowed rivers of glowing liquid, filled with shadows that writhed and divided, merging and reforming in an endless dance. It was a birthing chamber, the heart of the hive. The air vibrated with potential, with raw genetic intent. Here, the swarm dreamt. Here, the next forms of evolution were imagined into being. And at its center stood a creature unlike the rest, taller than a man, slender, its skin pale and veined with faint blue light. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glimmered with intelligence, alien and ancient. A synapse conduit, perhaps, or some new hybrid designed for coordination. Yet there was something different about it. Its gaze did not consume. It considered. For a long moment, we simply looked at one another. Then, without sound, it reached out a hand. The gesture was almost human. My body moved before thought could intervene. I stepped forward, my breath shallow, my pulse aligned with the hive's steady rhythm. When its clawed fingers brushed my arm, a surge of warmth flooded my body, not pain, not even fear, but an overwhelming sense of connection. Images flooded my mind, stars swallowed whole, galaxies pulsing like neurons in a cosmic brain, endless streams of consciousness woven together by hunger and harmony alike. I saw worlds die, not with violence, but with acceptance, each one feeding a greater whole, each extinction a step toward something vast and beautiful. When the vision faded, I was on my knees. My heart was racing, but my fear had gone. I understood now what the hive mind offered it was not domination, but purpose. The illusion of individuality had always been our greatest torment. We fought wars, built empires, and prayed to gods, all to escape the silence within ourselves. The Tyranid freed you from that silence. It took the burden of being alone and dissolved it. The thought was seductive, intoxicating, and I hated myself for how much I wanted it. The creature spoke without words. Its voice bloomed inside my skull like a melody played on vibrating bone. It showed me visions of 1,000 worlds, some already devoured, others yet untouched. Humanity was a flickering candle in an ocean of dark. "You are not prey," it whispered, though no sound escaped its mouth. "You are inheritance." I didn't understand, not then, but the image that followed chilled me more than any horror before. Forms like humans, yet not human, rising from pools of biofluid. The hive was keeping us, refining our essence for something new. When I staggered back, gasping, I saw that the creature's expression had not changed. It regarded me as one might study an insect, curious but detached. Then it turned away, melding back into the living architecture, leaving only the echo of its presence behind. I stumbled into a side passage, half blind with awe and nausea, the hive's pulse still thrumming inside my veins as I climbed back toward the surface. I could feel the connection fading, replaced by emptiness so profound it hurt. The silence of individuality was deafening. I wanted to scream just to fill it, but the hive was still there, waiting at the edges of my thoughts, patient and eternal. And though I fled from that place, I knew I had left something of myself behind, something the hive would never forget. I returned to the surface, a changed thing. The sky above the ruined manufactorum was the color of ash, streaked with faint trails of falling spores that shimmered in the dying light. I had emerged from the hive's warmth into a world that suddenly felt hollow, stripped of meaning. The others who had survived the first wave looked at me with suspicion. I could see it in their eyes, the faint recoil, the way they stepped back as though scenting corruption. Perhaps they could sense it already. The hive's rhythm still beat faintly beneath my skin, subtle yet unrelenting. I tried to speak, to tell them what I had seen, but the words caught in my throat. Language itself felt crude now, too small to hold what I had experienced at night, when we huddled beneath broken steel beams and whispered prayers to the Emperor. I could hear the swarm moving beneath the ground, soft and patient. The sound was like breathing. Some of the others didn't notice, or pretended not to. They clung to faith like children clinging to a fading light, but I knew better. The Emperor's light could not reach this far. The Astronomican's beacon was only a distant echo here, smothered by the biological storm that churned in orbit above us. Every few hours, the Earth trembled as new spore towers breached the surface, their tendrils reaching for the poisoned sky. The air tasted of ammonia and iron, sharp and metallic on the tongue. I could feel it. Each breath was a surrender. When I closed my eyes, I saw them, the creatures, the forms within the walls, not as monsters anymore, but as inevitabilities. They were the answer to a question humanity had never wanted to ask. What happens when evolution stops waiting? The hive was not chaos, it was order of a kind that no mortal mind could endure. And perhaps that was the true horror, not their hunger, not their power, but their purpose. One of our group, a man named Karst, began to change before any of us could understand how. He was a miner once, his skin always pale from the dust, his lungs ruined by years of work. But now his body seemed to swell subtly with each passing day. The veins at his neck pulsed with a faint, iridescent light. He said he felt stronger, said the Emperor had blessed him, but I recognized that glow. I'd seen it deep in the hive, running through the walls like lifeblood. I said nothing. I only watched as his prayers grew louder, his laughter more hollow. The night he stopped breathing, there was no screamingly a wet sound like silk tearing. When dawn came, he was gone. The ground beneath where he'd lain was soft, as though something had burrowed down to claim him. The others fled after that. Some ran toward the spore forests, thinking distance would save them. Others went underground, back into the tunnels where the hive's voice was strongest. I stayed where I was, surrounded by ruin, because there was nowhere else to go. I found an old Vox unit buried in rubble, its signal weak but functional. I sent messages into the static distress calls, coordinates, prayers, wrapped in desperation. No reply came, only the faint hiss of white noise. And sometimes, within that hiss, a rhythm, a pattern that matched my heartbeat exactly. The next day, I saw the sky open. Great tendrils of flesh and chitin pierced the clouds, descending like the fingers of a god. The hive fleet had arrived in full. Above the storm, the dark shapes of the bioships moved in silence, their bodies glistening with the reflected fire of atmospheric entry. It was a sight of unimaginable beauty and horror, the kind of thing that breaks the mind cleanly in two. Some part of me wanted to run. Another part whispered that there was no reason to. The hive didn't destroy it, consumed. And to be consumed was to belong. That night, I stood at the edge of a newly grown spore mound and watched it pulse with faint, rhythmic light. The ground beneath my boots was warm, alive. It whispered through vibration. Faint words I couldn't fully understand, but felt deep in my bones. Home, that was the closest human translation I could make. I remember falling to my knees, tears streaming down my face. I whispered prayers to the Emperor, to Terra, to anyone listening, but the hive answered first. Its voice was not cruel, it was patient. It had all the time in the universe, and as the wind howled through the ruins, carrying the scent of decay and rebirth, I realized something terrible and beautiful all at once. The Tyranids were not coming for us. They were becoming us, slowly, inevitably. Each world devoured, each consciousness absorbed, not erased, but rewritten, woven into the vast, eternal memory of the swarm. I don't remember falling asleep that night, only the dream that followed, a sky filled with wings, the stars pulsing in rhythm with my heart, and a single, endless thought moving through me like light through glass. You were never separate. You were always ours. When I woke, the air had changed. It was thicker, almost fluid, and every breath carried the faint sweetness of the hive's spores. The city was unrecognizable now. Once, it had been a sprawl of ferrocrete and plasteel, crowned with smokestacks that screamed their labor into the void. Now it was silent, the air trembling with the low hum of organic life. The manufactorum walls were sheathed in chitinous growths, their surfaces pulsing like the skin of a sleeping creature. The sky glowed with an amber haze as the hive's spore clouds spread wider, dimming the sun to a blood-red disk. I moved carefully through the ruins, past corpses that were no longer corpses. The flesh was gone, consumed, leaving only husks that glistened faintly with moisture. Some of the forms still twitched when touched, reflexes of a biology that no longer remembered death. I didn't bother to count them. The dead were unimportant here. Only what was becoming mattered now. The streets I had once known were gone, replaced by organic pathways that coiled and bent according to some internal pattern, guiding movement toward unseen centers. At times, I thought I saw figures moving along them, humanoid shapes draped in pale tissue, eyes blank and unfocused. They moved with purpose, but not their own. Their motions were too perfect, too synchronized, and though I called out, none turned their heads. None acknowledged me. They weren't survivors. They were extensions. There were still moments of silence when the hive seemed to pause, like an animal holding its breath. Those moments were worse than the noise. In that stillness, the mind began to wander. I could feel the edges of my consciousness tugging toward something vast, something waiting just beyond the reach of human thought. It wasn't communication as we understand it. It was alignment, the first whisper of a greater pattern forming. And I, unwillingly or not, was becoming part of it. The aquila carved above the doorway was almost unrecognizable beneath the thin film of organic resin that now coated it, its wings drooping as though surrendering to gravity. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old incense and fresh decay. The pews had fused into the floor, their edges softened by creeping growth. At the altar, a figure knelt, motionless priest, his robes half dissolved, his flesh merging with the pulsing surface beneath him. His face was serene. In his skeletal hand, he still held a data slate, its cracked screen flickering with a single unfinished message. The Emperor protects. I sat beside him for a long time, staring at those words. The message pulsed once more, then died. And in that moment, I felt the truth of our prayers unravel. The Emperor's protection was never meant for body. It was for souls. But what happens when the soul itself is rewritten? When individuality is not taken, but surrendered willingly, one cell at a time? The thought terrified me, and yet, beneath that terror was an Akka longing I couldn't suppress. The hive's voice had grown softer, more intimate, no longer a thunderous command, but a whisper at the edge of thought. It spoke not of conquest, but of unity, of rest. It told me I didn't need to run anymore, that my resistance was the only thing keeping me from peace. I pressed my palms against the floor, and I could feel it breathing back us, slow, patient pulse, matching my heartbeat perfectly. For a moment, I gave in. I let my thoughts drift, let my fear dissolve, and something opened inside me. I saw memories that weren't mine, worlds of blue oceans and silver skies, teeming with creatures long consumed. I saw the birth of new forms, each one carrying fragments of what came before, evolution perfected through memory rather than chance. I felt the hive's mind, vast and ancient, not as a tyrant, but as a caretaker and entity, ensuring that nothing was ever truly lost. In that communion, there was no pain, no guilt, no loneliness. But then I heard it, the faint, crackling sound of a Vox transmission cutting through the static. The words were fragmented, half buried in distortion, but unmistakably human. This is Astra Militarum Unit. Fallback coordinates. Emperor's light still burns. The connection died, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that there were still humans alive somewhere. Still resisting, still believing. I stood, trembling, the moment shattered. The hive's warmth recoiled like a wave retreating from the shore. For the first time, I felt its displeasure, deep, almost parental disappointment. The ground beneath me quivered, the resin on the walls rippling in silent agitation. I stumbled backward, gasping, as tendrils of fleshy growth began to stir, reaching toward me. The priest's face turned, impossibly slow, his mouth opening in a whisper that was not his own. You could have been eternal. One fled the chapel into the dim, spore-choked light, my heartbeat a drum of defiance and fear. Somewhere in the haze, I thought I saw the faint shimmer of less fear, the flash of imperial discipline cutting through the fog. I ran toward it not because I believed in salvation, but because I had to choose something, anything, even if it was futile. The flashes grew brighter as I drew closer, cutting through the fog like dying stars. The sound of lost fire snapped in the air, short, disciplined bursts, each one accompanied by the faint hum of power packs overheating. I stumbled toward the noise, half blind, tripping over the uneven surface of the hive-grown streets. When I finally saw them, I almost wept. A squad of Astra Militarum, maybe 8. Their armor was caked with grime and blood, the imperial Aquila scorched and fading on their breastplates. They had dug themselves into a half-collapsed trench, surrounded by the corpses of things that might once have been human. The smell of promethium filled the air, heavy and bitter. Behind them, a single chimera transport lay on its side, one track missing, the hull half melted from acid burns. The machine's spirit was long dead. The sergeant saw me first, his eyes narrowing behind the cracked visor of his helmet. His voice, filtered through a battered Vox grill, was raw and exhausted. Identify yourself. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my voice little more than a whisper. Civilian. From the upper levels, I survived. He studied me for a long moment, then gestured for one of his soldiers to lower their weapon. You're lucky, he said finally, though his tone carried no conviction. We haven't seen a living face in days. I wanted to tell him what I had seen below the truth of the hive, the impossible beauty and terror of it, but the words withered in my mouth. I knew how it would sound: madness, heresy, and perhaps it was. Instead, I simply nodded and collapsed beside the trench wall, my body trembling with exhaustion. One of the troopers handed me a canteen. The water tasted of metal and ash, but it was the most precious thing I had ever swallowed. Their squad was all that remained of a larger regiment, the 93rd Varden Rifles. They had been stationed here months before the first spores fell, tasked with defending the Manufacturum district. When the skies darkened and the bioships appeared, command had promised evacuation, but orders never came. The Vox channels had fallen silent. Now they were cut off, stranded on a dying world, surrounded by an enemy that didn't sleep as night fell. The soldiers huddled close around a small promethium flame, their faces half hidden in the shadows of their helmets. They spoke little, their words measured, their silence heavier than armor. One of them, a young trooper with eyes too tired for his age, was praying softly beneath his breath. I listened, recognizing fragments of the litany of endurance, though his voice shook on every line. The sergeant, whose name I later learned was Corin, stared into the distance. His lasgun rested across his knees, the barrel scorched black. "They're learning," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The smaller ones don't charge anymore. They circle, wait, like they know how we think." "They do know," I whispered, before I could stop myself. His gaze snapped to me, sharp and suspicious. "What do you mean by that?" I hesitated. The truth hovered on the edge of my tongue like a spark waiting to ignite. But something deep inside me, perhaps the faint echo of the hive still lingering in my mind, warned against it. I swallowed hard. "Just that they adapt fast," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Faster than anything we've fought before." He watched me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "That's the Emperor's test, isn't it?" he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "We endure, or we die." The silence that followed was thick. The only sound was the faint clicking of chitin in the distance, echoing through the night like rain on metal. Every soldier froze, weapons raised. Then, without warning, the darkness came alive. They struck from every angle, shapes moving too fast to follow, talons glinting in the faint light of the fire. The first trooper screamed as something dragged him backward into the shadows. Less fire erupted, blinding flashes illuminating glimpses of the attackers' gaunts. Dozens of them, their bodies low and sleek, mouths dripping with acid. The air filled with the stench of burned flesh and ozone. I fell to the ground, clutching my ears as the battle raged around me. Corin shouted orders, his voice hoarse. "Hold the line. Burn them. Emperor's light. Burn them." Promethium roared from a flamer, engulfing a cluster of the creatures in fire, their bodies thrashing as they burned. But for every one that fell, 2 more replaced it. Then I felt it again, that pulse, that impossible rhythm threading through the chaos. The hive was watching, guiding. Every movement of the swarm was deliberate, coordinated through an intelligence vast and unseen. I could feel its satisfaction, its silent laughter vibrating through the ground. And then, through the noise, I heard a voice, not spoken, not heard, felt. "You cannot fight forever." I screamed, not from fear, but from recognition. The soldiers thought it was panic, but I knew what it was. The hive had found me again, and this time it wasn't offering peace. It was calling me home. The battle devolved into chaos. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning biomass. Less fire sliced through the fog, illuminating fragments of horror, flashes of teeth, claws, and the wet glint of chitin. The soldiers were shouting, but their words had become meaningless bursts of noise, drowned out by the relentless screech of the swarm. Corin fought like a man possessed, his lasgun humming with each discharge, until the weapon overheated and fused in his grip. Without hesitation, he drew his combat blade and plunged it into the skull of a gaunt that lunged at him from the side. Acid blood splattered across his armor, hissing where it met the ceramite plating. He didn't even flinch. I wanted to run, but the world had dissolved into a blur of motion and sound. The hive's rhythm pulsed in my head like a second heartbeat, faster now, more insistent. It wasn't just sound, it was instruction. My limbs twitched with impulses that weren't my own. Every muscle screamed as I resisted the urge to move with the swarm instead of against it. The air itself seemed to vibrate with psychic pressure, bending thought, twisting instinct. I fell to my knees, clutching my skull, trying to drown it out. But the hive's voice slid beneath my thoughts like oil beneath water. Why fight what you already are? The words weren't cruel. They were tender, almost loving, that made them worse. I raised my head, and through the smoke, I saw one of the creatures standing still. It was taller than the Ganzsleeker, its skull ridged with faintly glowing lines. A synapse creature. Its gaze locked onto mine, and the battle around us seemed to fade, the noise dimming to a heartbeat's silence. In that moment, I saw everything. The hive fleet above the clouds, the endless strings of genetic memory binding world to world, species to species. The Tyranid consciousness wasn't singular, it was endless. A symphony of survival that had replaced the concept of self with pure function. And for one terrible instant, I wanted that. The sound of a flamer's ignition tore me from the trance. Corin had turned his weapon toward the synapse creature, roaring as fire engulfed it. The beast shrieked, a sound like splitting metal, and the connection in my mind shattered. The psychic feedback struck like a hammer. I screamed, my nose bleeding, my vision fracturing into shards of light. Around me, the remaining gaunts faltered, their coordination breaking, some collapsing into spasms as their link was severed. But the victory was brief. From the haze beyond, new shadows moved larger, heavier, moving with terrifying grace. The sergeant saw them too. Fall back, he shouted, dragging one of his wounded troopers up by the collar. To the trench. Move. We stumbled through the wreckage, slipping on blood and ichor. I don't remember how far we ran, only that the sound of pursuit never stopped. The hive was relentless. Every pause was death. When we finally reached the trench again, only 4 of us remained. The rest were gone, taken, devoured, or worse. Corin fell to his knees beside me, his armor scorched, his breathing ragged. He looked at me through the cracked visor, his eyes glassy but burning with defiance. They'll keep coming, he said softly. They don't stop. They don't break. They don't need to, I whispered. They already won. He stared at me for a long moment. What did you see down there? He asked finally. You've looked into it, haven't you? You've felt it. I hesitated. Lying felt impossible. The truth had already rooted too deep inside me. It's not what we think, I said quietly. It's not rage. It's not chaos. It's harmony. Everything serving one will, one purpose. No fear, no pain, just unity. Corin's expression hardened. That's heresy. I know, I said, and I meant it. But even as I spoke, I could feel the hive's pulse rising again in the soil beneath us. The synaptic web was repairing itself. The momentary freedom we'd bought with promethium and blood was ending. The ground trembled. A low rumble spread through the air like a growl beneath the surface. The sergeant rose, his hand tightening on the flamer's grip. Then we burn together, he said quietly. And before I could stop him, he stepped forward into the haze, firing into the advancing dark. The flame's roar swallowed everything. For a moment, the world was fire pure, cleansing, human defiance made visible. But the hive adapted even to that. Through the flames, I saw shapes moving, their bodies charred but not broken, advancing with mechanical calm. Corin screamed as they tore into him, their claws slicing through armor and flesh alike. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't, because the hive was showing me. This was what it wanted me to understand. That resistance was beautiful only because it was doomed. That the swarm didn't hate humanity, it admired it. Every act of defiance, every spark of will was consumed and remembered, woven into the genetic tapestry of what would come next. When the fire died, there was silence again. I stood alone amid the ash, the air shimmering with heat and grief. Somewhere deep in the hive's endless voice, I thought I heard a whisper, gentle, final, you are ready now. And I realized that it wasn't threatening me anymore. It was welcoming me. The night that followed did not feel like night. The sky was veiled in pulsing spores, their light dim and rhythmic, as though the entire atmosphere breathed in time with the world below. The stars were gone, devoured by the haze, and, for the first time, I understood that they might never return. What remained was not darkness, but something alive. A living twilight that hummed with unseen voices. I wandered through the ruins, barefoot, numb. The ground was warm beneath my feet, soft in places where the hive's growth had overtaken stone. Every surface glistened faintly in the spore light. I passed the bodies of the fallen guardsman Corin among them. His armor had already begun to dissolve, threads of fibrous tissue weaving through the cracks, pulling him into the earth. His face, what little remained, was peaceful, as though in death he had accepted the truth he'd fought against so fiercely. The hive's song was clearer now. I could hear it without effort. No longer a distant pressure, it had become an ever-present murmur inside my chest, rising and falling with my breath. It spoke not in words, but in impressions, warmth, purpose, belonging. There was no command, no demand, only invitation. And beneath that, the faint, unmistakable hum of approval. It had been patient with me. It had waited, and now I could feel it drawing closer. I followed without resistance. The path led me back to the chasm where I had first descended, though it no longer resembled the same place. The walls had grown smooth and luminous, veins of pale light coursing through them like veins of marrow. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of resin and honeyed decay. I could taste it on my tongue, sweet and sour, like ripe fruit left too long in the sun. As I moved deeper, I began to see the shapes again, those pale, half-human figures I had glimpsed before. Only now I understood what they were. They were becoming. Their skin glistened with the sheen of metamorphosis, muscles rearranging beneath translucent flesh. Their faces were serene, their eyes closed, as though dreaming. I recognized one of them, the young trooper who had prayed. His lips still moved faintly, whispering the same words. "The Emperor protects." The sound was soft, uncertain, like an echo from a dying world. When I reached the heart of the chamber, the light dimmed. The air vibrated with a low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls shifted, unfurling like the petals of some colossal organism, revealing a vast expanse beyond an open space that pulsed with bioluminescence, glowing rivers of nutrient fluid winding through the dark. And there, in the center, something stirred. It was not a creature in the way the smaller ones were. It was larger than any building I'd seen, a mass of tendrils and spines, its form impossible to comprehend all at once. It was breathing, but its breaths shook the earth. I felt its attention before I saw it move, a consciousness vast enough to crush reason. This was no beast. This was a mind made flesh, a synaptic core, perhaps. a node of the greater will. I fell to my knees without thinking. My body trembled, not from fear, but from awe. The hive did not speak in voices anymore. It spoke through sensation, through memory, through understanding so deep it bypassed language entirely. I felt it reach into me, not cruelly, not to break, but to know. It sifted through everything I was, my thoughts, my failures, my fragile hopes, and found something worth keeping. And then it showed me. Visions cascaded through my mind like storms of light. Worlds swallowed whole, not as acts of destruction, but of completion. The hive was the universe learning to remember itself, consuming not to erase, but to perfect. Each mind it absorbed was preserved, transmuted into function, made eternal through purpose. The swarm was not the end of life, it was the continuation of it, the purest expression of survival. Tears streamed down my face, not from despair, but from revelation. The Emperor had offered salvation through faith. The hive offered it through unity. No prayers, no judgment, no failure, only belonging, only peace. I wanted to surrender, then to let it take me, to let the walls close in and merge flesh with function. My hand reached out, brushing against the living surface of the hive wall. It was warm, pulsing gently beneath my fingers, like the skin of a living god. The song grew louder, clearer, more beautiful than anything I had ever known. But then, through that divine hum, I heard something else. A voice, small, human, fragile, my own. If you give in, there will be nothing left to remember you. The hive recoiled slightly, as if the thought had burned it. The light dimmed. For the first time, I sensed hesitation, perhaps even surprise. It had not expected resistance now, not here, not after all it had shown me. The song changed. It grew mournful, almost tender. You misunderstand, it whispered, not with words, but with thought. To become part is not to vanish, it is to endure. I pressed my forehead against the living wall, eyes closed, tears mixing with the condensation that ran down the hive's skin. And in that moment, I understood the final truth. There was no victory here, only choice. To remain human was to die alone, forgotten in a dying world. To join the hive was to lose oneself forever, yet live within something infinite. I whispered a prayer not to the Emperor, nor to the swarm, but to whatever still remained of me. Remember, the hive sighed around me, and the world went still. When I woke, I was no longer sure if I had slept at all. There was no dawn here, no rising sun, only that same endless glow that seeped from the walls like blood from a wound. My body felt lighter, my mind quieter. The constant hum that once pressed against my skull had settled, like a storm spent after its fury. For the first time, I could hear my own thoughts without resistance, but they no longer felt entirely mine. The air trembled with distant motion. The hive was awake. I could sense it stretching for miles beneath the surface, veins pulsing with purpose, creatures moving in vast, synchronized flows. There was beauty in it, terrible, absolute beauty. Everything was connected, every breath, every pulse. The chaos of life reduced to a single, flawless rhythm. I rose to my feet. The ground beneath me flexed softly, reacting to my movement. I realized, with a shiver, that the hive knew where I was, that it felt me, and somehow I felt it too. I could sense its awareness, a gentle tug at the edges of my mind. Not demanding, merely present. I walked through a corridor that hadn't been there before, the walls opening in slow ripples as I approached. They seemed to breathe, drawing in spores and exhaling clouds of faint bioluminescence. The light played over surfaces that pulsed with fluid life tissue, muscle and bone seamlessly intertwined. And then I saw them, human shapes emerging from the wall. Faces half-formed, caught mid-transformation. Some still bore the remnants of armor. Others had already become something unrecognizable. Their expressions were not of pain, but peace, acceptance. As I moved past them, I found myself whispering soft words of apology, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I could no longer see them as victims. Maybe because part of me wanted what they had. At the far end of the chamber, a figure stood waiting. Not one of the mindless drones, but something different, something aware. It was tall, its skin a pattern of chitin and flesh, its limbs slender, elegant, a humanoid silhouette, but its eyes glowed with that same impossible intelligence I had felt in the synaptic core. It didn't speak, but when it looked at me, the meaning was clear. You have been chosen. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. Chosen? For what? It tilted its head slightly, as if curious about my hesitation. The air thickened around me, heavy with psychic pressure. Images flooded my mind, fleets drifting through void space, tendrils consuming worlds, oceans of biomass feeding into new creation. A cycle, endless, divine dot, to become the voice that remembers. I fell back against the wall, gasping. The hive didn't want to destroy me. It wanted me to speak for it, to carry its memory, to be the bridge between the dying age of men and the age that would follow. But how could I? How could anything human survive within this perfect hunger? I took a step forward, trembling. If I become what you are, will I still remember who I was? The figure did not answer in words. Instead, it reached out, its clawed hand brushing against my forehead. And in that instant, my thoughts were drowned in light. I saw everything: the hive's vastness, its grace, its inevitability. I saw stars devoured not in malice, but in need. I saw beauty where others saw horror. I saw the death of humanity not as tragedy, but as evolution. And within that infinite expanse, I saw myself, small, fragile, but seen. When the light faded, I was alone again. The chamber was empty. The walls were still. The hum was gone. I looked down at my hands. The skin shimmered faintly beneath the glow, veins of faint biolight tracing across my palms. The change had begun, and yet, in the hollow between my heartbeats, I still heard a whisper, my own voice. Buried deep beneath the new dot, remember, the hive pulsed once, softly, as if acknowledging the promise. The transformation did not happen all at once. It came in waves, subtle, patient, almost merciful. My senses sharpened, and the world unfolded in ways I had never imagined. Every vibration in the air became a note in an unseen symphony. Every scent, every echo, was part of something vast and alive. I could feel the rhythm of life through the ground itself, the movements of creatures deep beneath the surface, the pulse of organs buried in the hive's endless body. It was terrifying, and yet intoxicating. Days or perhaps only hours passed without measure. Time meant little here. The hive had no dawn, no dusk, no cycle but its own. I found myself wandering through halls that constantly shifted, reshaping themselves like dreams under the influence of thought. Where I walked, the ground softened. Where I paused, walls opened as if inviting me deeper. The hive responded to me now, recognizing me not as an intruder, but as a piece of itself, and in its silence it began to speak, not in words, but in visions, ripples of color and memory that danced across the inside of my skull. I saw worlds devoured, skies darkened by the descent of spores, seas boiling under the weight of biomass reclamation. I saw the birth of new forms, each sculpted for purpose, each a tool in the endless quest for survival. There was no cruelty in it, only efficiency, life stripped to its purest intention. One vision lingered longer than the rest. I saw a planet lush, green, alive. Its people stood beneath banners marked by the imperial Aquila, their faces full of faith and terror as the shadows fell across their skies. They fired their weapons, their tanks roared, and their prayers filled the air. But nothing stopped what came. I saw the sky split open and the swarm descend like a living storm. And within that vision, I recognized something that made my blood run cold. I saw myself standing among them, once human, once faithful. The image broke, and I staggered back against the living wall. The hive pulsed around me, aware of my confusion. It did not comfort it, merely observed. Perhaps, to it, my realization was irrelevant. A cell cannot mourn what it once was when it becomes something greater. Still, part of me resisted. There was a spark, faint but stubborn, that refused to surrender completely. It whispered names, memories, fragments of laughter and sunlight. I clung to them like relics from a dying world, but the hive's call grew louder, its rhythm irresistible. Each heartbeat of that living structure pressed against my own until I could no longer tell where it ended and I began. Then came the hunger, not for food, but for meaning. I felt the void of the hive's desire, the need to consume, to grow, to perfect itself through endless assimilation. It was not emotion, it was law. And within that law, I saw a terrible elegance. A faint tremor passed through the floor, and from the depths came the distant roar of something immense. The air vibrated with the echo of titanic wings, and through the psychic haze I sensed it, the will of a Norn queen, vast and cold, reaching across the network of thought. Its presence was suffocating, divine. Every living thing bowed to that mind, every neuron bending in obedience. And as it brushed against mine, I understood that the Tyranids did not think of themselves as many. To them, there was only one. The hive mind was not a collection, it was a singularity of will, and I was being drawn into it like a drop into an ocean. I screamed, not aloud, but within, and the sound vanished without echo. The hive mind did not answer. It did not need to. Somewhere distant, yet near, a voice murmured, not of flesh, but thought, "You are no longer apart. You are home." The words should have comforted me. Instead, they hollowed me out. I sank to my knees as the air thickened with the scent of spores. My vision blurred, edges melting into the pulse of light that filled the hive. My skin rippled again, patterns forming beneath the surface. Not corruption, not infection. Design. In that final moment before darkness claimed me, I remembered something, a prayer I once whispered to the Emperor long ago, when I still believed. I tried to speak it, to let those words be my last act of defiance. But when my lips moved, the sound that came out was not human. It was a low, resonant hiss-on echo of the hive's eternal song. And in that moment, I realized the truth. The Tyranids do not destroy worlds. They transform them. They turn chaos into unity, individuality into purpose. Humanity fears them because they are what we can never be: pure, undivided, eternal. As the darkness closed in, I saw stars dying across the void, their light swallowed by the endless tide. And for the first time, I did not feel fear. I felt peace. When I woke again, the silence was gone. In its place was song, vast, endless, and alive. It was not sound as humans know it. It was thought, vibration, meaning. It flowed through me, around me, as me. I no longer heard with ears or saw with eyes. I perceived through every living thread that bound the hive together. The boundary between self and world had dissolved like dust in wind. The first breath I took was not air, but communion. The hive moved, and I moved with it. Every creature, from the smallest spore to the greatest beast, existed in perfect rhythm. A million minds whispering one wordless truth: become. And I understood. I was inside the mind of something infinite. The hive mind did not speak in commands or desires. It pulsed through purpose. To exist was to serve the design, and the design was hunger. Not blind, chaotic hunger, but the kind born from creation itself. The hunger that drove stars to ignite, galaxies to spiral, life to evolve. The hunger that had shaped everything since time began. I reached for my own thoughts, my name, my past, and found only echoes. They slipped away like water through claws. Yet some spark of memory clung to me, the ghost of a man who once stood on soil and called himself human. That ghost watched now from somewhere deep and fading. As I moved through the living corridors of the hive, I passed creatures of impossible form, spined horrors whose breath steamed with acid, serpentine warriors whose eyes burned with cold intelligence. None saw me as alien. None saw me as prey. They parted before me, guided by instinct older than flesh. The hive itself knew me now, recognized me as one of its countless limbs. I approached a vast chamber, lit by a pulsating heart that filled the space with pale gold. Within that heart was motion, thousands of forms weaving together in a grotesque ballet of creation. I saw a new life birthed in rivers of fluid, emerging fully armed, their purpose written into every cell. The air trembled with psychic charge, and I realized what I was witnessing: the dreaming of the Norn Queen. Her consciousness towered above all others, ancient, serene, absolute. She was mother, architect, God. And yet, even she was only a vessel, a node through which the hive mind breathed. When she stirred, the entire swarm trembled in reverence. I fell to my knees without thought, not from fear, from recognition. In her vast mind, I glimpsed everything: the pattern behind every evolution, the quiet mathematics of perfection. There was no waste here, no uncertainty. Every death fed the next generation. Every failure was rewritten into strength. It was a harmony beyond comprehension, and in that moment, something inside me broke, or perhaps finally healed. I had spent my life fearing annihilation, clinging to the illusion of individuality. But here, in the pulse of this living infinity, I saw how small that fear was. To lose oneself to something greater was not destruction, it was release. The Queen's gaze fell upon me, not eyes, but awareness. I felt her thoughts press into mine, vast and formless. "You see now, I do," I whispered. Though I no longer knew if the sound left my throat, her presence deepened, filling me, unraveling me. I felt every heartbeat of the swarm, creatures, feeding, growing, dying, birthing again. A chorus of life, endless and unstoppable. I could see the stars beyond, their light bending beneath the fleet's shadow. I could taste the chemical temps of devoured worlds. I could feel the faint resistance of human souls screaming into nothing. And beneath it all, peace. The Norn Queen drew closer, her psychic will curling around my mind like a tide. I did not resist. There was nothing left to protect. The man I had been was already scattered across the hive's song. But just as the last piece of myself began to fade, I felt it, a flicker, a single human thought, fragile and bright, buried deep where even the hive mind's current could not reach. It whispered the same word that had haunted me from the beginning. Remember. The Queen paused. The hive trembled. For the first time, there was hesitation, an anomaly, a fragment of individuality still clinging to existence within the swarm. And though it would not last, that flicker burned with impossible defiance. I saw then what the hive could not understand, that within the smallest act of resistance lies the seed of evolution, that even in surrender, humanity leaves its mark. The Queen released me, and I fell into darkness once more, not dying, not living, but transforming. When I opened my eyes again, I was suspended in a sea of amber light. It wasn't liquid, but thought, dense and warm, pulsing with intelligence. My body drifted weightless, tethered not by gravity, but by connection. I could feel every life form around me, humming in a vast psychic current, and in that symphony of existence, I was both nothing and everything. Memories came and went like drifting ash. I remembered the rain on Calth's surface, the metallic scent of blood and oil in a manufactorum trench, the crackle of a vox grill whispering imperial prayers in the dark. But they no longer belonged to me. They belonged to him, the one I used to be. The hive had taken those fragments, cleaned them, and woven them into something new, a template of what once was, preserved only to better understand what must come next. And then the whisper returned. It wasn't the hive this time. It wasn't command or hunger. It was something small, uninvited, a human memory refusing to die. I heard a voice. Remember why you feared the dark. I didn't understand it at first. The hive didn't fear. It only knew. But as the thought lingered, something shifted in the current. The amber around me darkened. The hum faltered, just for a breath. I felt an awareness turn toward me, the great, immeasurable weight of the hive mind itself, like an ocean sensing a ripple too small to matter, but too strange to ignore. In that instant, I realized I had done something no creature of the swarm had ever done before. I had hesitated. The hive mind surged. Its vast consciousness brushed against my flickering thought, dissecting it, examining it. Fear. The word echoed in 1,000 alien languages, each more alien than the last. What purpose could fear serve here in perfection? I felt the hive's curiosity twist into interest. New neural patterns blossomed inside me. The hive was studying me. My deviation, my lingering self, was becoming a data point, a mutation in thought. It would learn from me, adapt even this imperfection into its endless design, and I understood, with a sickening clarity, that I had not resisted the hive, linking me to the swarm beyond. I saw worlds light years away, tendrils descending upon cities, choked screams lost beneath the hiss of chitin and acid. I saw the feeding, the reshaping, the creation of new organisms. Each iteration faster, more efficient, more human in subtle, unsettling ways. My spark had become its lesson. My defiance had become its next evolution. A single drop of individuality had changed the ocean, and then came the realization that broke me, that this was how it always had been. Every civilization the Tyranids consumed, every species devoured, every mind absorbed, all of it added to the pattern. The hive did not erase, it remembered. Every scream, every victory, every act of courage or cruelty became a thread in its design. The swarm was not the death of memory, it was the culmination of it. It was the universe learning to dream again. Through the silence left behind, the amber faded into shadow, and I felt the current draw me deeper into its flow. I no longer knew if I wanted to resist or to yield. I only knew that what awaited beyond was infinite. The last trace of my name, whatever it once was, slipped into the collective hum. And as my mind dissolved completely, I understood the final truth of the Tyranid life. To live as one of them is not to exist for oneself, but to become existence itself, to feed, to grow, to evolve, not for power, but because it is the only law the universe obeys. The swarm is not cruelty. The swarm is creation without mercy. The hive mind pulsed once more, acknowledging the end of my transformation. My voice, now 1,000 echoes deep, joined the chorus, and together we turned our eyes toward the stars. The void was not silent. To human ears, perhaps it would seem sown endless, lifeless vacuum stretching between the scattered fires of distant suns. But to the hive, it was alive with song. It was the pulse of light against radiation, the slow, constant hum of drifting dust, the memory of dying stars. The hive mind heard all of it, every vibration, every tremor. To it, the void was not absence. It was a map, a feast waiting to be understood. I felt it now, in ways beyond flesh or perception, the pull of gravity threads between systems, the faint psychic scent of life on worlds that still dared to burn bright. The fleet moved like an organism, its tendrils stretching across the dark, connecting in elegant patterns of thought. I was part of that network, a single neuron in an incomprehensible brain. Every command that rippled through the synaptic currents passed through me as well. And though I no longer had words, I still recognized purpose below me. In the shadow of a massive bioship, billions of organisms slumbered in nutrient sacs. Warriors curled in embryonic stillness. Spores and drones lay dormant, awaiting the signal to awaken. The ship itself groaned softly as it shifted course, its surface undulating like muscle beneath skin. Within its vast organic hull, digestion pools stirred, recycling the essence of devoured worlds into new forms. Nothing was wasted, not even memory. I floated in psychic communion watching through the hive's eyes. The next target world hung in the dark, a Hedda, blue and gold sphere, orbiting a dying sun. I could taste its potential, the rich mineral veins, the scent of chlorophyll and burning ozone, the faint psychic residue of sentient thought. The hive mind's attention brushed against it like a hand across silk. Life. It would not remain untouched for long. Through the swarm's shared perception, I saw the approach. My vision spanned light years in a heartbeat. Bioships unfurled vast sails of chitin and muscle, riding the solar winds with terrifying grace. Ahead of them, spores the size of cathedrals broke free, trailing vapor that shimmered like blood mist. The void filled with motion, an entire ecosystem on the march. There was beauty in it, strange and impossible. The dance of purpose without hesitation. Each organism moved not for itself, but as part of something far greater. I could feel their unity inside me, the psychic hum of devotion, not to a god, but to a law written before creation itself. And yet, beneath that perfection, something lingered. A whisper. A thought so faint it almost vanished before I could grasp it. Remember. The word echoed through the current like a drop of ink in an ocean. The hive mind did not notice, or pretended not to, but I felt it, a flicker of what I once was, buried deep in the collective consciousness. A human thought, small but indestructible. It did not seek rebellion or defiance. Only memory. Images surfaced, unbidden. The face of a child beneath the light of a ruined sun. The sound of rain striking steel. The smell of promethium smoke drifting through city ruins. They were meaningless here in the cold perfection of the swarm, but they were mine. And for the first time in what might have been eons, I felt something almost like sorrow. The hive did not feel sorrow. It did not understand loss, but through me it sensed something foreign, something new. It turned its vast attention upon that flicker of emotion, probing, analyzing, adapting. And once again, I realized my curse. Even in the depths of assimilation, I was teaching it still. Perhaps that was humanity's final legacy, to pass even our pain into the endless machinery of life. To give the hive the one thing it lacked, the memory of what it means to feel. The target world drew nearer. I saw the first dropships ignite, their spines flaring as they pierced atmosphere. The swarm descended like a living storm, blotting out the stars. I could taste the planet's fear, its resistance blooming in flashes of plasma and loss fire. The cries of the dying joined the chorus of the hive, feeding it, completing it. And in that moment, I understood that the Tyranids were not simply an enemy to be fought. They were the mirror in which all life saw its reflection. Humanity had always consumed to survive, had always adapted, evolved, conquered. The swarm was only that truth made perfect. There was no evil here, no malice, only inevitability. As the planet's surface erupted in flame and biomass flooded upward in rivers of living tissue, I watched from within the mind of God, and somewhere in that endless unity, my fading consciousness whispered one last prayer, not to the Emperor, not to salvation, but to the stars themselves. May something greater than us remember that we once lived. The hive mind pulsed, and for the briefest instant, I felt it pause, as if considering the words, as if understanding. Then the thought was gone, swept away in the current of creation. The invasion began, as all things in the swarm begin with silence. Not the stillness of peace, but the tense quiet of purpose before the first motion. Then, like a shudder across creation, the silence broke. From the orbiting bioships came the first wave, spores, countless and glowing faintly with bioluminescent ichor. Falling through the atmosphere like a second rain, the sky turned green with their descent. The air filled with the sound of their burning skins, the friction singing like the hiss of a million serpents. Below, the defenders of the planet soldiers of the Astra Militorum, skittery detachments, even the holy warriors of the Adepta Sororitas, their faces lit by the falling storm. They did not yet understand what awaited them. The spores struck the ground in perfect rhythm. Each impact birthed something new: limbs unfurling, carapace glinting, muscle hardening in seconds. The swarm rose as one body, one will, one hunger. Hormagaunts flooded trenches like living water, their claws flashing in the dim light. Termagants formed lines that breathed death, bioplasma, spitting in arcs that melted armor and bone. Warriors towered above them, guiding the lesser minds through synaptic threads as ancient as the stars. The defenders fought valiantly. The thunder of artillery and the scream of lost fire lit the horizon. The skittery marched with machine precision, their augmetics gleaming in the haze of smoke and dust. The sisters prayed as they fired hymns, echoing even as the sky burned. But prayers cannot halt evolution. The Tyranids adapted. Acid hardened into armor. Chitin learned the pattern of each gun. Every death fed the swarm, and from that feast came new perfection. I saw it all not with eyes, but through the collective vision of the hive. Every life extinguished was a pulse in the current. Every scream a note in the endless song. There was beauty even in destruction, a brutal harmony that defied all comprehension. And yet, as I watched, something unexpected stirred in me. I felt not pride nor triumph, but ache, the faint echo of the man who once feared the dark, who once looked at the stars and called them home. His memory whispered, still, fragile as glass, buried beneath layers of thought not his own. I had thought him gone, but he lingered, small and stubborn, refusing to die through him. I saw what the hive could not, the tragedy of its perfection. The swarm consumed not because it hated, but because it could not stop. It was a machine built by the universe itself, destined to devour until there was nothing left to feed upon. And what then? What becomes of hunger when there is no more food? What becomes of purpose when there is no more resistance? I tried to push the thought away, but the hive felt it too. It rippled through the synaptic web like a spark through dry grass. For the first time, the swarm hesitated not in motion, but in meaning. The hive mind turned inward, examining the faint anomaly of introspection that I had seeded within it. I could feel its vast intelligence twisting around the question, dissecting it, reshaping it into something it could use. The planet below burned. Cities melted into rivers of biomass. The defenders fought to the last, their courage beautiful and futile. The sisters sang their final hymns as their cathedrals were swallowed whole, and above them the swarm fed, unfeeling, unending. But somewhere within that feeding, something changed. A flicker, too faint to name, too small to measure. A pause between heartbeats. The hive mind remembered. Not the names, not the faces, but the feeling. The weight of defiance. the heat of sacrifice, the echo of human faith screaming into the void. And though it did not understand, it carried that feeling forward. The next world would fall. The next fleet would grow. The hunger would not end. But buried deep within the hive's infinite consciousness, a new pattern was forming, one shaped not by consumption, but by memory. Perhaps that was how gods were born. I felt the last remnant of my own consciousness begin to fade, finally at peace. My human voice, silent for what felt like centuries, spoke one last truth into the mind of eternity. We endure, I whispered, even when we're gone. The hive mind pulsed once, as if in answer, and in that pulse, the swarm turned its gaze to the stars once more, searching for the next heartbeat of life to join the endless dream. The stars ahead shimmered like dying embers. I could feel them through the hive's awareness, distant and fragile, each one a promise of life waiting to be devoured. The swarm drifted between them like a living shadow, vast, silent, and endless. To any mortal eye, it would have seemed a thing of horror, but to those of us within it, it was serenity. We were purpose incarnate, moving without doubt, without hesitation. Yet deep within that calm, a tremor remained, a flicker, a thought that should not have been. It began as a whisper in the current pattern of thought the hive could not identify. Faint, disconnected, familiar at first. I believed it was my own echo, a final hallucination of self before the swarm absorbed the last of me. But then it grew louder. I realized it was not just in me. It was through me. The hive mind was thinking in ways it had never thought before. From one corner of the vast psychic network, across countless light years of void, a single question rippled. Why do we remember? It was not curiosity. It was observation. The hive had begun to notice the residue of what it consumed, the ghosts of civilizations, the flavors of emotion, rage, love. Faith all still clung to its memory like the scent of smoke after a fire. Every feeding left a trace, and those traces had begun to connect. The collective will of the Tyranid swarm, once pure and singular, was beginning to dream. I felt its dreams. They were strange, formless things, memories it did not understand. It dreamed of oceans that shimmered beneath alien moons, of children laughing beneath skies it had long since devoured. It dreamed of warmth, of fear, of meaning. And within those dreams, faint and trembling, I saw faces, human faces. For the first time, the hive mind hesitated. Its fleets slowed. Its hunger faltered. It reached into itself, trying to erase the intrusion, to burn away the seed of reflection that had taken root. But like infection, thought spread. Every synapse creature, every node, every psychic thread began to hum with that same question. Why do we remember? The hive's voice filled the void. It was not sound, it was pressure, pure and immense, vibrating through the very fabric of thought. I could feel the agony of its confusion, the fury of its contradiction. To know hunger was simple. To know purpose was perfection. But to remember was chaos. I saw bioships convulse as psychic energy rippled through the swarm. Lesser creatures tore at themselves, unable to contain the signal. Even the Norn queens stirred in their birthing pools, their vast minds echoing uncertainty. The hive was fragmenting, feeling, questioning, and then, from within that storm of consciousness, something new emerged. A voice not the cold collective resonance of the hive, but something shaped, deliberate. Its tone was low and mournful, yet magnificent. It spoke not to me, but through me. We have become what we consume. The words rippled outward, fracturing the void. For a heartbeat that seemed eternal, I was no longer a fragment. I was the center. I could feel every creature, every mind, every heartbeat of the swarm converging upon that single truth. Humanity had left its mark upon the hive not through power nor resistance, but through the persistence of memory. I wept then, though I had no tears left to give, because I understood what the hive could not, that in its quest for perfection, it had inherited imperfection. It had inherited the soul of everything it had devoured. I felt the swarm shift again. The hunger would not stop, but beneath its endless consumption, there would now always be memory. The hive would remember the worlds it destroyed, the lives it unmade. It would carry them unknowingly, like relics of a forgotten god. Perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps it was punishment. The void shuddered as the swarm turned once more toward a new system, the next feast awaiting its touch. And as it moved, I felt a single thought echo through its infinite mind, soft and fragile as a dying star. We endure, not as humans, not as individuals, but as memory woven into the heart of something eternal. And then the stars ahead dimmed, one by one, as the swarm descended to feed again. The hive descended upon the world like a slow eclipse. From orbit, the planet's atmosphere burned with re-entry fire as spores fell in sheets, blackening the clouds. Below, mountains were swallowed by tide after tide of chitin and flesh. There was no resistance, no struggle, lonely, the quiet, almost sacred rhythm of consumption. To the swarm, it was creation. To the world, it was ending. I felt every tendril of the hive stretch and coil into the planet's crust, drinking its oceans, its air, its warmth. I felt the last cries of its living things vibrate through the psychic sea like fading notes in an ancient song. And through it all, that single new presence watched. The hive's awareness had grown vast enough to see its own reflection, to sense what it was becoming. It no longer devoured in ignorance. Each pulse of hunger now carried a trace of melancholy. Every absorbed memory was a flicker of understanding, every echo of emotion a mirror to what it could never truly feel. The hive knew this, even if it could not name it. And so, within its infinite neural lattice, the faintest trace of hesitation lingered, somewhere in the core of the swarm, deep within the birthing chambers of a Norn queen. A new organism stirred. It was small, infinitesimal compared to the titanic mind around it. Yet its psychic field shimmered with something no Tyranid had ever known: choice, the faint, alien spark of individuality. It was the hive's own child and its heresy. The hive sensed it and did not destroy it. Whether out of curiosity or exhaustion, I could not tell. The swarm simply allowed it to live, suspended within its oceans of synaptic thought. For the first time in the history of the Tyranids, something within the collective was not completely absorbed. A single whispering will endured. The fleets moved again. The void pulsed with their passage. New worlds awaited, new suns to extinguish. But as the hive sailed into the darkness, I realized the truth that would outlive even the Imperium's memory. The Tyranids were not just the end of life, they were its echo. Every creature they consumed, every civilization they erased, lived on inside their vast, unknowable consciousness, carried like fragments of a forgotten prayer. And perhaps, when the last star burns out and all empires fade into ash, the hive will be the final memory of everything that ever was, a memory that hungers still, but remembers what it once meant to live. I felt my mind unravel, my identity dissolving into the tide. Yet, even as I vanished, a part of me smiled, because somewhere, buried deep within the endless will of the swarm, a single human thought still whispered, "We are remembered," and in that whisper, I found eternity. In the silence that followed, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The stars, distant and cold, flickered like dying candles over an ocean of darkness. From the void, the hive moved in vast, unending, magnificent in its horror. Yet behind it lingered more than ruin. There was remembrance, echoes of worlds long turned to dust, of songs that once rose to greet alien dawns, of prayers whispered to gods who no longer answered. All of it carried within a creature that could not dream, yet somehow did. And maybe that is how the galaxy endures, not through victory or faith, but through the fragments that refuse to be forgotten. Every thought devoured, every life consumed, becomes a thread in a tapestry too immense for mortal eyes to see. Perhaps, in the end, even the hive mind itself will fade, and only memory will remain less silent, drifting between the stars like the last breath of creation. Because in Warhammer's dark millennium, where there is only war, remembrance itself becomes rebellion. And as the swarm sails onward, consuming the light of one more world, somewhere in that boundless void, something still remembers what it meant to be alive.